Welcome back, all you lovely people, or welcome for the first time if this is your first time here. Thank you so much for stopping by. It really does mean a lot to me. Today, we've got My Life in Horror, episode 1993, and spoiler alert, it sucks. So stick around.
You're afraid of dying.
How do you know? You've never tried it before.
Alright, as you saw on the thumbnail, as I just said, My Life in Horror, episode 4. The year is 1993, and the year is not a good one to horror. It's just not. We're gonna get into that, but first, if you could hit that like button, maybe consider subscribing if you haven't. Really does help me out. Go watch the other videos in this series before you jump into this one. As I said, this is episode 4. Let's just go ahead and jump into these, and you'll figure out what I mean by it sucks. We're gonna kick it off with the highest grossing of 1993. Now, this is according to the numbers from BoxOfficeMojo.com. Some movies didn't even go to theaters. Some of the highest rated movies of this year didn't even go to theaters. So they won't have box office numbers. However, these are the box office numbers for the ones that made the most, and it's not good. Just going to say that right now. And kicking off the highest grossing at number 3 is a movie called Needful Things, which I have not seen. Don't even know what it is. It's not a good year for horror, but Needful Things comes in at number 3 spot with $15.1 million. All right, next up is a movie that I do know, but I wish I didn't. And I'm gonna say the number first. It grossed $15.9 million. It's Jason Goes to Hell. And I'm gonna be honest, it's the first movie I researched for this, and I saw how little it made at the box office, and I was like, there's no way this is going to end up in the highest grossing. And surprise, surprise, it's here. That tells you what you need to know about the rest of the movies that came out this year. So, number 2, you got Jason Goes to Hell. What can we say about this movie? It's not good. It's quite possibly my least favorite of the Friday the 13th films. Kane Hodder is, amazing as always, but it's just, man, they tried to add so much to the backstory, bringing in the paranormal element, having the fucking Necronomicon in this thing. It's just not good. It's not good. But it made $15.9 million, so that's enough to earn it the number 2 spot for 1993. And at the number 1 spot for the highest grossing of 1993, it wouldn't really be, My Life in Horror if there wasn't a controversial pick in there. And this one is The Good Son. Now, I have seen this, it's been a very long time, but it's essentially a movie about a woman with 2 sons, played by Macaulay Culkin and Elijah Wood. One of them is evil, one of them isn't, and antics ensue. Now, this is it's a controversial choice because it could be considered not horror, could be considered mystery, thriller, drama. It has some horror elements. It's so I think it counts. I'm counting it, and it grosses like 4 times the next closest pick, which is Jason Goes to Hell. Good Son in 1983 made $60.6 million. So as I said, it kind of dwarfs the other choices from 1993, but it is controversial. However, I'm keeping it there. So at number 1 spot, the highest grossing of 1993 is The Good Son with $60.6 million. Next category we got is the highest rated. Once again, this is according to audience scores on Rotten Tomato, not the tomato meter. I don't give a fuck about critics. Audience score. And kicking off the spot, the number 3 spot is also The Good Son. It's no surprise this movie, because it has the other elements that are non-horror and it wasn't a straight up horror movie, got a bigger audience. More people voted on it. It's more of a family friendly movie. So I think that helped it a lot in terms of box office and in terms of ratings. But it's got a 54% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. And at the number 2 spot for highest rated, this is a movie I've never seen. I know of it now because I didn't know it existed before this. But it's When a Stranger Calls Back. And if that sounds familiar, that's because it is a sequel to When a Stranger Calls. This is a direct to TV, made for TV sequel to When a Stranger Calls. Now, I was surprised because it actually has a fairly good rating. It's got a 61 out of 100 audience score, from what I understand. Because, like I said, I didn't know this movie existed until I started researching 1993. When I went to look, two main characters came back, director came back. It it seems to be pretty well accepted. However, it couldn't get box office numbers because it didn't go to theaters. It was made for TV. But it's got a 61 out of 100, so that's a pretty decent score for a made for TV movie. There you go. Number 2 spot, When a Stranger Calls Back. And the highest rated horror movie of 1993 is one a lot of you probably haven't heard of. I have heard of it, have not seen it. It's a movie that only made 620,000 at the box office, not millions, 620,000. And that's a movie called Kronos. Now, it is a significant movie in the fact that it's the first theatrical release for a very well known director now, and that's Guillermo del Toro. This was his very first theatrical release. Like I said, I've never seen it, but I do know about it. I know about the story. I know it has Ron Perlman in it. I know it's about this scarab medallion that kind of grants immortality, but also kind of feeds off of people. Then there's an angel who's played by Ron Perlman who's sent to get the scarab back. It's a weird movie. It is horror. It's a Guillermo del Toro's types horror. So take that. Guillermo del Toro is almost a subgenre all its own. Anyways, it went to theaters, but it only made 620,000. First time theatrical release for Guillermo del Toro, starring Ron Perlman, but it got a 69 out of 100. So that's the highest rated horror movie of 1993, Kronos. And this week we are bringing back the not horror, but kinda, but has elements of horror, because there are three movies that came out this year that I had to talk about because they're movies I love. They're worth mentioning, even though they're not straight up horror. And at the 3 spot for that is RoboCop 3. Now, I love the RoboCop movies. I even love the remake of RoboCop with Joel Kinnaman. I thought it was great. RoboCop 3, definitely not the highest rated of the series, but it's worth mentioning because I think they're significant. They're definitely significant to me. It has elements of horror. It's got, the post-apocalyptic kind of downtrodden society or downfall in society that you get in those movies. It's definitely scary, and some of the horror you get in, or some of the violence and ultra violence you get in these movies, definitely have horror elements. So I thought it was worth mentioning. And at the number 2 spot is a movie called Hocus Pocus. Definitely not horror all the way, but it's got horror elements. It's got witches, it's got curses, it's got people getting killed, their souls being sucked out by witches. I mean, it's got horror elements. It is made for children, and it's more of a family movie, but it's got horror elements, and for damn sure it's worth talking about. And I know, had I included it in the rankings of the Rotten Tomatoes score and the box office, it would have blown some of the other horror, like actual horror movies, out of the water. And that's why I didn't include it in those, but it is worth mentioning on the list because it came out in 1993. So Hocus Pocus. And the top spot in 1993 of the not horror but kind of has horror elements is, it's a movie that I personally, and my fiance and I have talked about this, would consider a 10 out of 10 movie, a perfect movie, and that's Addams Family Values. That's right. And I want to go ahead and go back and correct, because talked about the original Addams Family movie on a previous episode, and I said Tim Curry, and my cousin John in the comments corrected me. You're absolutely right. It's not Tim Curry. He did play Gomez Addams in the third Addams Family movie. I believe it was like Addams Family Vacation or Addams Family Reunion, something like that. But in the first Addams Family movie and this Addams Family movie is this Raul Julia playing Gomez Addams. This movie, Addams Family Values, is superior to the first Addams Family movie. It is a perfect movie. There's not much more I want to say about it. It's not exactly horror, but the same thing. I said the same thing about the original Addams Family movie. It's got horror elements. It's got that dark gothic feel. It's just a fantastic movie, and it's definitely worth mentioning, even though it's not straight up horror. So there's my 3 not horror, but kind of has horror elements. Okay, we've reached the final category, which is my top 3, and I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna be a quick one because I haven't seen most of the horror movies that came out this year, and the ones I have seen aren't the greatest. So I'm gonna kind of just rattle through these pretty quickly. And the number 3 spot is The Good Son. I don't, of the movies that are here, it's probably the best made movie. I'll give it that. It's probably the best movie of the ones we've listed that fit into the horror category. However, I don't like it the best of the three possibilities for the number one spot. So I'm gonna put the Good Son at number three. Number two is Jason Goes to Hell. I never thought it would be in any top three list for me. This is the only time it will be. So at number two spot is Jason Goes to Hell, and the number one spot is a movie we haven't talked about this year so far. It's kicking off its franchise, which is still going, and that's Leprechaun, the original Leprechaun with Warwick Davis and Jennifer Aniston. So yeah, it's not a great movie. It's not. I have a soft spot for the Leprechaun franchise. I love the demented little quips, and I love all the like crazy tiny vehicles it gets to drive and things like that. I really do enjoy the Leprechaun franchise, and it's gonna be my number one spot because I do 100% think the first Leprechaun movie is better than Jason Goes to Hell. No, not even a question for me. But yeah, it's not a good list, y'all. 1993 fucking sucked for horror. I'm gonna be honest. And once again, I didn't say this at the beginning, but there's probably some I missed. If there is, I'm sorry. These are just the ones that stuck out as being, as being relevant. And there are others that didn't get on here, like Body Bags, Return of the Living Dead 3 was on here. It almost cracked the highest ratings. Amityville New Generation was on here. There's a fucking ton of those. Man's Best Friend, Needful Things, Ticks. There's a lot of movies on here that I don't know about that could have made other lists, but there's plenty more. There's infinitely more horror movies that came out in 1993, but they were either like low budget, no budget, foreign releases, something that just don't fit into the categories that I've established. So, if your favorite one from 1993 isn't on here, I'm sorry. Let me know what it is down in the comments. I'd love to know what your favorite from 1993 is. I'd love to know if there's one that I missed that you just think's worth discussing. But there you go, y'all. That's 1993 in a very quick nutshell. It was not a good year so far in my lifetime. The worst year for horror. But that's it. I'm gonna cut it off there because I don't have much to talk about, unfortunately, because I haven't seen most of these movies. But if you watched this far, thank you so much for sticking around. Please do consider watching the rest of the series if you haven't caught up to 1990 to 1992. I'll be back next Saturday with 1994. Hopefully it's a better year, but I don't know yet. And yeah, I love you all. Have a great, safe week.
Oh, I hate goodbyes.